the second portion of this hearing by the House Armed Services Committee. And I certainly appreciate the patience of the members, as well as the endurance of our witnesses, General Dunford, Mr. Shanahan, Mr. Norquist. Thank you very much. And we'll go ahead and pick up where we left off. As the chairman mentioned, I was next in order, so I'll begin with my line of questions. And let me just start by saying that I think, I recognize that as, members of the Armed Services Committee, our responsibility is to look at authorizations for underlying supporting the National Defense Strategy, and that the National Defense Strategy really implements one of the four pillars of the National Security Strategy. That's peace through strength, with a focus on building a more lethal force. As we, as members of Congress more broadly, are looking at how do we ensure that we authorize and appropriate for the entire national security strategy, which includes defending the homeland, a lot of defense and non-defense spending that's in there, American prosperity, a lot of non-defense spending in there, and projecting American values. In fact, if you look at the National Security Strategy, it talks about vocational training, it talks about diversifying the energy portfolio, it talks about a forward presence of the diplomatic corps and our development activities throughout the world. So let me turn, though, to the focus of this committee, the National Defense Strategy and the underlying budget. This year, the President's budget request is for $750 billion, $718 to the Pentagon, which is the highest adjusted for inflation since the height of the Iraq War. And overseas contingency, it includes an OCO funding of $174 billion, $164 billion to the Pentagon, which is the absolute highest that we've seen since the height of the Iraq surge in 2007 and 2008. And this is occurring at the same time that the National Defense Strategy is talking about a pivot away from the counterterrorism fight, not abandoning that fight, but pivoting away as we focus more on great power competition and with China and Russia. I think it's important for Congress that, we are open and transparent to the American public, and that the Department of Defense is as well. So when we have appropriations categories and authorization accounts, that we can demonstrate to the American people that we're faithful to the original design and intent. So I just want to ask you about a few items, just to shine some light on what we're actually doing here, what's being requested in the President's budget request. I'm reading $8 billion for ship depot level maintenance has been moved from the Navy base budget to the OCO account. And to my knowledge, there's not a single dollar for depot level maintenance in the base budget. Is that accurate?
I believe that sounds correct.
Okay. $1.2 billion for Trident II nuclear missiles in the overseas contingency operation funds. Is that accurate?
It is. It would be in the OCO for base, correct?
Yeah, it's in the OCO, Overseas Contingency Allowance, Trident missiles. 533 B-61 low to medium yield nuclear bombs are in the OCO portion of the budget. Is that accurate?
I don't know that one off the top of my head, sir.
Yeah, that is accurate. I'll answer that one. There's $1 billion for the Patriot missile system, the OCO budget. The Patriot, as you know, is to defend against advanced enemy fighters. We're talking about in an overseas contingency operation fund. Does that sound accurate?
That may be right. The Patriot is also used in terms of defensive facilities and bases against missiles.
And then finally, I want to point out the European Deterrence Initiative, $500 million remains in the OCO budget. I understand that it's been done that way in previous years, but again, we're talking about reassuring our NATO allies about a long-term commitment, yet a substantial portion of our funding commitment is in a OCO account, which is not long-term budgeting. It's better than a CR, but it's not long-term funding. Is that accurate?
Yes, the EDI has historically been funded through that OCO account, and it was last year and in prior years as well.
So is this sound budgeting practice for the DOD and supporting a defense budget?
So the use of the OCO is divided into two parts. As I talked earlier, there's the traditional one, and we've broken it out in the budget to make.
No, I get that. I guess my question is this: putting in some of these sort of modernization programs, long-term programs that are not exclusively for current or anticipated overseas contingency allowances, putting, for example, 533 nuclear bombs in OCO. Is that sound budgeting or accounting practices?
It's not how we have presented it the previous year.
Okay. Let me just shift with the remaining time I have, because we haven't asked about the transgender policy. I think that budgets are important reflection of both our priorities and our values. Would you agree with that, Secretary Shanahan, that a budget reflects our values and our priorities?
Yes.
So, when President Truman desegregated the armed forces, he stated, "It is essential that there be maintained in the armed services of the United States the highest standards of democracy, with equality of treatment and opportunity for all those who serve in our country's defense." Would you agree with that, Secretary Shanahan?
Yes, I would.
Are you aware that, and you've heard it today, the Army, as of September 30th, failed to recruit enough soldiers to meet its projections for the last fiscal year?
Yes.
And you have also heard that 71% of young Americans between age 17 and 24 are ineligible to serve in the military?
That is correct.
Would you agree that a manpower shortage in the United States Armed Forces directly compromises national security?
Yes, it does.
Are you aware that there are transgender soldiers serving in today's military who are meeting and even exceeding standards in every criterion that we use to measure performance in the military?
I don't have the specific.
Okay. Because they testified in front of this committee about 3 weeks ago. And are you aware of the fact that many of these transgender soldiers have successfully transitioned to their gender of preference?
Yeah, I don't know that, but
Yeah, because this is an important policy change. This isn't changing sort of like the Army green to the Army green and pink.
Right.
This is a personnel policy that will exclude a certain category of Americans from serving. So I'm just trying to inquire what you do know about it. Are you aware that the Chief of Naval Operations, the Marine Commandant, the Army Chief, and the current Air Force Chief all testified publicly in their own words that transgender serving in the military won't affect readiness, doesn't affect military discipline, has not been disruptive to the military service, nor has affected unit cohesion? Are you aware of that?
I'm aware of their testimony, yes.
And you know that in July of 2017, President Trump said that he consulted his generals and experts when he decided not to accept transgender individuals to serve in the military. General Dunford, as the then senior military advisor to the president, is it accurate that within days of President Trump's ban on transgender service that you stated, I would just probably say that I believe any individual who meets the physical and mental standards and is worldwide deployable and is currently serving should be afforded the opportunity to continue to serve? Did you say that?
I did say that, Congressman.
Has your opinion changed on that?
It has not, Congressman.
I will now turn to, thank you very much for your responses to my line of questioning.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
General, I think since we have gone down that road at some length over time, it is important now to put on the record a bit more about the process that Secretary Mattis used in evaluating the prior administration's policy in this regard, and a little bit more fulsome about the factors that were looked at, how the decisions came to be made that he issued during his time. And I don't know, either one of you, I don't know which of you is better to do that, because you were both there, but I think it'd be important to discuss that a bit.
I'll take a first stab at it and then see if the Secretary wants to add. So we did use the words physically, mentally, psychologically capable of being worldwide deployable without special accommodations. And then the Secretary engaged the leadership across the department, but that also included medical experts from across the department. And so what the Secretary did was, based on the definitions, and I think you were sensitive as well, Ranking Member Thornberry, that some of this is still in litigation. So what I'm trying to do is be as forthright now as I can be without getting into that issue. But the Secretary included the leadership and then medical experts. And so then based on the definition of physically, mentally, psychologically capable of deploying, performing in their occupational fields with the caveat without special accommodation, he proposed a revision to the 2017 policy. That was the process that was used to be able to do that.
Okay. Secretary Shanahan, you have anything you want to add?
No, I think the 2018 policy really just applies standards uniformly.
Yeah. I think there's a misunderstanding that the policy was changed on the whim of a tweet, and that's part of the reason I think it's helpful for members to know that there was a deeper, longer process that was involved that resulted in the Mattis policy. Now, as y'all may know, we're going to have a sense of Congress resolution on the floor this week, which is part of the reason that this is coming up right now. I don't think probably it's appropriate for us to debate that now, but as you point out, there is litigation underway. I suspect there will be more conversations about these various considerations, and that may well involve the department and the service chiefs in looking at these issues. I yield back.
And we'll now go to Mr. Banks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Shanahan, have you ever had a conversation or any engagement with Secretary DeVos about sensitive research on college campuses and tools of Chinese espionage like Huawei, Confucius Institutes, et cetera?
I have not with Secretary DeVos, but I have with the FBI.
Okay. Do you believe that there's more that we can do to restrict Chinese nationals who are students on college campuses from being involved in DoD-funded sensitive research?
I think there are.
Are there good reasons for us to do that?
Yes, there are.
Okay, good. I'll move on. Secretary Shanahan, on September 26th of last year, Secretary Mattis and VA Secretary Wilkie issued a joint statement promising a new and improved joint governance structure to manage MHS Genesis and the VA EHR modernization. I have asked the VA officials multiple times to share the thought process, and zero information has been forthcoming. Yeah. I understand that a study of various options was completed in February. When can we expect such an announcement on the new EHR organization?
Yeah, I'll take that one for the record.
Okay, and even better yet, before the announcement, would it be possible for some of us who are involved in this subject to be briefed, receive a briefing of some sort?
Yeah, and is the line of thinking where are the synergies or the benefits being captured based on this unity of effort?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you. Moving on to another issue. Secretary Shanahan, in your opening testimony, you stated, quote, "We are applying maximum pressure to ISIS-K and other terrorist groups in Afghanistan to stymie any threats to the U.S. homeland." Can you elaborate on this military campaign, and how would a quick withdrawal impact the longevity of ISIS-K in Afghanistan?
Well, my reference there is to the work of General Miller and the Special Forces, and their work also with the Afghan Special Forces. As you're very well familiar with General Miller's soft background, he is, at this point in time, this anchors back to our South Asia strategy. So he's really bringing a concentrated effect, a soft presence, and a more muscular effect, not just to Al-Qaeda and ISIS, but to the Taliban.
Okay. General Dunford, can you state the importance of the, quote, Afghan-owned peace process? Do you think our current negotiations exemplify that?
Hey, Congressman, what we need to do is start reconciliation. So what I'm optimistic about is that Ambassador Khalilzad has at least opened up a dialogue, and after 17 years, I'm encouraged to see that. The intent, the clear intent that's outlined by the Secretary of State and is in the terms of reference is that this process include legitimate representatives of the Afghan government and the Afghan people. So that's the direction we're headed in. I think to look at the negotiation at any point in time would not be probably a full sight picture.
On that same subject, General, what conditions would you expect from the Taliban before the U.S. is safely able to withdraw from their country?
Beyond the Taliban, when I make a recommendation to the Secretary and the President about our future presence in Afghanistan, it'll be based on our national interests in the fact that Afghanistan is not a sanctuary from which terrorists can attack the American people, the American homeland.
Okay. So, Secretary, back to you. We've had some discussion already about the size and strength of the United States Navy. Mm-hmm. Even if every Congress and President agreed on the goal of a 355-ship fleet for decades to come, we still won't reach that desired goal for at least 40 years. What do you expect the balance of forces between the U.S. and China to be by the time we achieve a 355-fleet Navy?
Well, let me just speak to the time. I think it's 2034 in which we reach the 355-ship Navy. The discussion, it's the future force structure won't necessarily be defined by our traditional measures of 355 ships. I mean, the real work that we're undergoing right now is what is the right mix. This goes back to, autonomy, semi-autonomous, surface, subsurface mix. I don't think the course that the Chinese are on is the same course that these naval battles will be fought on in the future. The warfighting doctrine is going to change dramatically. That doesn't mean that we divorce ourselves from our current infrastructure, but I really think that this transition to future forces, space, cyber, missiles will have a profound impact on the type of Navy we have and the size of those vessels and the composition.
Thank you. The gentleman's time's expired. Mr. Kim.
Thank you so much for coming. I actually want to be able to continue on the great line of questioning that my colleague was just going through. I think it's incredibly important that we think about what the American people are worried about, how they're understanding the issues that we're dealing with the military and with security. And what I'll tell you is that oftentimes the conversations that I have back in the district in New Jersey are different than the conversations we'll have here in this room. We just heard some great line of questioning about Afghanistan. And I think that's key because that is something that's always on the minds of the American people in my district when they're thinking about security. And while these other issues we have talked about are important in this discussion here, as we're thinking about our priorities and our budget, I think it's important for us to be able to make sure we're always being proactive about explaining to the American people what we're doing in Afghanistan and what our next steps are. So I just always encourage the three of you and others at the Pentagon and elsewhere to be thinking about how it is that we can raise those issues and continue to show the American people that these are not issues that we're sweeping under the rug, that we're going to stay engaged, especially after we know that there are people who are eligible to serve out in Afghanistan now who were in diapers on September 11th. That is just a core reality we need to comprehend here. So I want to just bring a question back from the district to you, which is, as we're going through this, what are those circumstances that we need to be able to understand when we will no longer require U.S. military personnel in Afghanistan? I know that it's going to be dependent in part on the peace process and the discussion there. I understand that. I also understand that the South Asia strategy also talks a lot about how the regional countries are engaged in this. But when I think about the train, advise, and assist mission, I see a lot of parallels between where we're at right now in Afghanistan and also in Iraq, with these being core elements. But what I don't have a sense of is when do we no longer need to have U.S. personnel on the ground to be able to help support with train, advise, and assist or other capabilities there? General?
Congressman, I'll take a stab at it, and then you can come back at me with additional questions. I mean, what I would tell your constituents back in the district is that when there is no longer a threat of terrorism in South Asia that would affect the homeland or the American people, then the mission can end. And until that point, if we end the mission before that condition is achieved, then we'll be managing risk of an attack on the homeland from South Asia. And I would just tell you today, given the almost 20 groups that operate in that area, and certainly the intent, if not today, the capability of al-Qaeda and ISIS Khorasan, it's my judgment, my military judgment, that continued pressure on those threats is directly and inextricably linked to the security of the American people.
Thank you for that. When we're making that assessment of the threats, especially to the homeland, I agree with you, that should be the measure by which we understand our involvement, what can you tell me that reassures me that the Afghan Defense Forces are ones that are being able to develop to be able to do that on their own? Even if we were to get to a point where you or some other general as a commander can be able to make that determination, if we were to then not have the Afghan forces at the capabilities where they can do that on their own, then obviously we may fall back into a situation again as we've seen over the last couple of years in Iraq. So on the Afghan security forces side, what circumstances or what conditions do they need? What proficiencies do you need to see in their forces to give you confidence that they would be able to handle this on their own?
Sure, and Congressman, it's beyond just a military issue, right? So it's the capability of the Afghan National Defense Security Forces. It's also the capability of the Afghan government to sustain those particular forces. And when would that happen? I guess what I would tell you is if you went back to 2013, we had 100,000 Americans on the ground, total of 140,000 NATO forces, and that was the size force that was necessary for us to advance our national interests at that time. Today, we have about 13,000 Americans in Afghanistan as opposed to 100,000 Americans back in 2013. So I know this isn't moving as fast as the American people, and in particular your constituents, would want it to be, but what we have tried to do is make sure that the level of effort that we had in Afghanistan was consistent with the threat and consistent with the capabilities of the Afghans to deal with that threat on their own. And it's our judgment today that, particularly with regard to combat enabling capability and high-end special operations capability, the kind of support we're providing today continues to be necessary. And I would add there's 39 other nations that are with us in supporting the Afghans right now.
No, thank you for that. I
gentlemen.
think that's incredibly important. I yield back.
Yeah, and Mr. Gates.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My questions relate to the zero-sum decisions we seem to be making relative to our 5th generation and 4th gen fighting aircraft. My first question is whether or not the manufacturing base has been a consideration in the decision to upgrade the F-15.
Do you want to take the? Right. So I think when we looked at the factors that we talked about, you want to maintain a competitive industrial base. You also want to make sure you have weapon systems with the right mix of capacity and capability, and there's a mix between them. And
yeah, we're going to go through the capabilities,
right.
But specifically as to the manufacturing base, is it your view that this decision to make the F-15 upgrades is essential and that the manufacturing base justifies that decision?
I don't know if it justifies it by itself. I just think it's a factor that needs to be considered.
How many F-35As can we build in FY 2020?
I need to get you that number. What's the production rate for the shed?
Yeah, what's our manufacturing capacity for the aircraft that we've spent the better part of several decades getting ready to launch into the skies?
We've got 78 in the budget. I don't know what their capacity is per year.
Procurement cost has been another justification for the decision to purchase fewer F-35s and to have the F-15X options that have been laid out. When you finish the F-15 upgrades with the full complement of targeting pods and sensors and jammers, what's the flyaway cost?
I don't have the specifics on flyaway costs. The maintenance and operating costs of them will still be lower.
We can get to that.
Right.
First, procurement cost. Was it an assumption we made that the procurement cost of the F-15 upgrades would be less than buying more F-35As?
I believe the main driver was in the maintenance and the sustainment costs. The procurement costs were different, but they were not as dramatically different as the others.
The procurement cost of which is lower? How about that?
Of the 4th generation is lower.
So what you're telling me is it's cheaper to buy and upgrade a fourth gen F-15X than it is with the flyaway cost for the F-35A?
I believe so. I can get you those for the record. I know we've put those numbers together for the committees.
I'm looking at an $80 million flyaway cost on the 35A, and then once you lash the necessary, electronic weapons pod and other tech to the F-15X, you're looking at a $90 to $100 million flyaway cost. Does that sound
I'm not
right?
sure what other additional things you're attaching to it. Depends on the mission you're asking it to perform.
I would only the mission set that we would assume when we make these budgetary decisions. Mm-hmm. If you could provide for the record for me the detailed breakdown on not maintenance cost, procurement cost on these two weapon systems, that'd be most helpful.
Sure.
Operational cost. you were making a point about that as well. What's the basis for the view that the F-15X will have a lower operational cost?
So there's an analysis that was done by our CAPE organization that went through and compared the set of them, because you talk about there's the purchase cost, the sustained maintenance cost, and basically the life cycle cost when you think of how long the aircraft lasts. And it also compares it for the different missions we need them to perform. If you're operating in a permissive environment where you're looking at the capacity of the ability of the plane to do strike versus
If you look at a melded rate, what's our, on the F-15X, what does it cost per hour to fly it?
I don't have those for me. I know that they're available, but I didn't bring them with me to the.
So as you guys provide, for the record, for me, the procurement cost breakdown on the X versus the 35A, it'd be really helpful to have the melded rate on hourly cost to fly the 35A and the F-15X, because I'm looking at some data that says that by 2025, we're going to drive down that cost on the 35A to $25,000 per flying hour with a melded, understanding their different missions, but as a melded rate, and that's a year after the budget says we would have the first operational F-15Xs, so presumably that would be a number consistent with the data that showed that to be $27,000 to $30,000 per flying hour. So if you can break that down for me.
We'd be happy to. It's one of the things we'd ask people to assemble, because following the briefings on the mix, these were some of the common questions, and what we wanted to do is give every one of the committees the exact same set of data so that they understood the
Yeah,
data.
I'm a little surprised you don't have it. I mean, because there seems to be a pretty deliberate decision to lean into the F-15X, and so I would have thought that that would be really relevant information for a budget discussion. I want to take my final moments to just ask Secretary Shanahan, can you explain the ways in which these budget priorities recognize the changing environment in the Western Hemisphere, Venezuela, and how we're going to make sure we support Southcom effectively?
Yeah. So one of the fundamental assumptions that we've been building into the force mix and the force design is
And
that
if you can do that in 30 seconds, that'll work, okay?
Yeah, no, I'll do it even more quickly. We've designed this, and the chairman's been extraordinarily helpful here, dynamic force employment, so we can move forces quickly and reconstitute them in areas where there's demand, and to increase interoperability. That flexibility allows us then to surge in the case of SOCOM when they have a different mission or they need to surge for a short period of time, but not to fundamentally change their footprint.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Mrs. Horn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, General Dunford, as Secretary Shanahan, and Mr. Norquist. Really appreciate your testimony. I know we've had a few rounds of questions, but I want to dig a little bit further into space realignment and priorities, which I believe are really important, and to Mr. Kim's point earlier about making sure that the public understands them. And I'm going to direct my first questions to General Dunsford, because I'd like to hear from you about this. It's safe to say that space assets exist across all of the branches and all of the functions of our armed forces today?
Space capabilities exist across 3 of the 4 services. All the services leverage space.
So space is a critical component of our warfighters' ability and our overall national security architecture.
Absolutely critical for everything from navigation to communications to targeting.
Okay. Also safe to say that developing space assets and capabilities is not an easy endeavor.
That's accurate. Okay.
So looking at this space question, and also I wear another hat as the chair of the Space and Aeronautics Subcommittee in the civilian space arena, and knowing that we have a number of additional players in space, I want to dig into a little bit of what this looks like, because I think it's important for us to understand both the needs, the capabilities, and the future development of this. And it certainly would be my intention, and I think I've heard that from many of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, that we make the best decisions in the best interests of our overall national security. It's not a partisan issue. It's about our current and future capabilities, understanding that this architecture is important. So across the different programs, across the different services, do you think that it is possible that right now, and we've also talked about acquisition and cost and audits, that there may be programs or different capabilities being developed right now that are potentially duplicative or could be more efficiently utilized across a common architecture?
I think it's entirely possible that we could be more effective and efficient in developing space capabilities, and that really is the foundational argument for the Space Development Agency.
So, following on with that, in the interest of not only protecting our national security, but understanding that with additional players and hundreds of thousands of pieces of space debris, and not only our national security interests, but also commercial and our just general lives day to day, depending on it. What, General Dunford, because we heard from you earlier, Secretary Shanahan, I appreciate that. What do you think about the model and the potential pathway forward? Does it need to be a separate force, or could it be more of a core model? What is your opinion on that?
In my view, Congresswoman, there's really two issues, right? There's the how do we best integrate joint capabilities today, and so that's been heretofore described as a sub-unified command, moving to a unified command for Space Command. That takes the force we have today. With regard to the specific organizational construct, I'm satisfied with the one that we've laid out, and I'm confident that over the next several years, it'll be refined. It'll be refined. I think the important thing is, in the current organizational construct we have today within the Department of the Air Force and within the Joint Warfighting Force with a Space Command, gives us the ability to first train the right people, identify and train the right people, develop the right capabilities, and then when those capabilities are developed, field those capabilities in the most effective way for the warfighter. So I think we have all the pieces in place, and I think like every organization, it'll grow over time, but we ought not to seek perfection before we start to step out and change the way we're doing business, given the importance of space. That would be my own thoughts on this.
Okay, and just to go back one more piece of this, I appreciate your answers. Is in the proposal, one thing that caused me to raise my eyebrows. There's some changes and some exemptions for employment practices and procedures that are within this proposal, and it provides broad exemptions to current law. I understand the need to realign as something else is being stood up, but I don't understand, and I'll leave this to either one of you. Could you explain to me the justification behind these broad exemptions?
So there are two types. One was set up on personnel, and that was modeled after the personnel authorities of the National Reconnaissance Office. And then there's another one that was modeled after how the Air Force did its transition to being a separate service. So those authorities are designed to be similar to other organizations, either stand-up or space. Is one of the areas.
I'm sorry, but
Yep.
the lady's time has expired at the front, and I believe Mr. Lamborn is next. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. First a statement and then a question, first for the Secretary and then for the Chairman. You stated earlier, Mr. Shanahan, Secretary Shanahan, that if forced to prioritize between Space Force, Space Command, and the Space Development Agency, Space Command would be your first priority. I would like to point out that the Space Command did exist in Colorado Springs from 1985 to 2002, and currently Air Force Space Command and the National Space Defense Center are located at Peterson and Schriever, both in Colorado Springs. So if the threat is as urgent as you suggest, and I believe it is, and if time is of the essence, I would highly recommend that Colorado Springs be the best location, given, in addition to those considerations, the massive number of space warfighters and infrastructure already in place. So I'll just go on record as making that point. My question is this. Can you describe why this administration and the Department of Defense have exhibited such a sense of urgency regarding the reformation of our military space enterprise? Is it because the threat is so dangerous and so imminent?
I'd just say, fundamentally, it's now a contested environment, and a $19 trillion economy and the world's most powerful military runs off space. And in that contested domain, if we don't protect it, we're all at risk. So it's really, I mean, the urgency is the threat that so much of what we depend on, our, maps in our cars, the ability to, target our weapons is vulnerable. And
Well, then what would you say to someone who says, okay, but I see a threat,
Yep.
but can't we attack that problem within the existing structure? I know the Air Force, to their great credit, has come up with some reform proposals, but is that enough, or do we need to go beyond?
Well, I think we need to go beyond. That's what the proposal represents, and really the Space Development Agency, and this is the part I'd emphasize. Ignore the agency piece, you could call it Space Development Organization. It's about development, it's not about acquisition. This is what General Schriever did. This is what was done in SDIO. We need to marry up the right programmatic skills so that we can go more quickly and leverage off of the innovation and investment in commercial space. Our acquisition rules can't accommodate that. And that's the restructure that we're proposing here, so we can go more quickly and use the technology that already exists. So, to me, waiting to tailor our current environment will just take too long.
Okay, thank you. Chairman Dunford, in your professional military opinion, especially given your career as a Marine in the Department of the Navy and the importance of culture in the services, can you explain the benefits that a separate military service focused on space will provide, whether as a Space Force or Space Corps, however it's denominated and whatever the final details are, which would not be gained by simply reforming military space within the existing structures?
Sure, Congressman. In my experience, an organization that has a singular focus, has responsibility for identifying people, training people, equipping people, and then delivering them to the warfighter for integration, has a much better chance, particularly given the importance of space. It's one of only 5 domains. But we have a much better chance with an organization that has that singular focus, as well as making sure that with regard to prioritization and allocation of resources, that we don't drain away resources that might have been used for space for other reasons. And I know being part of large organizations, there's always going to be that temptation. And so I think having the opportunity, and frankly, from an oversight perspective, I would see the appeal from Congress as well to make sure you have the oversight that you need to have, that those resources that are necessary for us to be competitive in space are actually managed properly.
And I know some have expressed concern about adding bureaucracy, quote unquote, or additional flag officers. On the positive side, does that give more of a seat at the table, so to speak, to the folks in space, which is important?
Well, I think a senior leader who does sit at the table obviously has more influence. And someone asked me earlier, should this person be a member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff? And of course, if they're a service, then by definition, I think that would be a reasonable thing to do. But I have seen personally now over the last couple of years, particularly as a result of General Hyten being in the room, that when he's been around, given his experience in space, the dialogue quickly shifts, and we think of things that we wouldn't have otherwise thought about without him in the room.
Again,
Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. Just for everyone's understanding in terms of the order here, there is one confusing aspect of this. Basically, you're in the order that you're in when the gavel falls. If you leave, you're still in order. What has been happening a lot is people come back literally in the 2 to 3 minutes before they would be next. Under the rules, that person is then next. Now, that's inconvenient because I know a lot of members are anticipating, okay, that's next and I'm next. But even if you think you're next, if somebody walks in who was there at the gavel and who is in front of you, that person is next. Personally, I'm rethinking that rule because it's a little bit unfair to the people who are sort of planning on what's here. But that's just the way it is. So if you think you're next and I wind up calling on somebody else, that will be because somebody else who was in front of you walked back in. And that's going to happen right now. Ms. Shanahan, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a number of questions, and thank you very much for your testimony today, gentlemen, Mr. Shanahan and General Dunford and Mr. Norquist. I'm going to focus my questions today on the impact of the fiscal year 20 budget on our defense industrial base and our investment specifically in cybersecurity across the DoD enterprise. But before I did that, I wanted to start by echoing some of my colleagues who've gone before me in their frustration with the department's interactions with Congress over the funding for the President's planned border wall. what you refer to in your remarks as the border situation. I led a letter from my colleagues from Pennsylvania, sir, Mr. Shanahan, to you asking if you could provide a list of unawarded MILCON projects in Pennsylvania that would be imperiled. And I also asked for that list to contain an assessment as well of the impact if those items were canceled or delayed as a result of the border wall or the border situation. And I was really glad to receive the list of Pennsylvania projects, but I still haven't seen any sort of assessment on the impact of those projects if they were not to come to fruition in this time frame. Nor have I seen any questions for the record from this committee's first meeting back in January, where I asked for an assessment of the impact on border deployment on our service members' readiness. And I serve on the readiness subcommittee as well. And I would certainly have hoped that the department would have conducted an impact assessment and briefed it to the president before anyone started talking about moving this money around. And I definitely would have hoped that this information would be more readily available now coming up on 3 months from when we initially asked for it. There are 4 projects in Pennsylvania, as it turns out, that are at risk if this plan moves forward. And I wanted to, just for the sake of my time, highlight only one. Last year's appropriations bill included $71 million for the construction of a new facility in Philadelphia, where we manufacture the propulsor systems for the Virginia and Columbia class submarines. The Naval Foundry and Propeller Center is essential for the design, manufacturing, and repair of propellers for the U.S. Navy. A new facility is needed to accommodate the increase in personnel and equipment that comes from the push to manufacture these new submarines. And so, simply put, even though this is a propeller, we can't meet the administration's goals of a new submarine fleet without this. Last week, the Commandant of the Marine Corps wrote that supporting the, quote, unplanned and unbudgeted southern border deployment was an exacerbation of an already challenging budget year for the Marine Corps. So I'll move on to my questions soon, but I just wanted to say for the record that the ill-advised plan really has significant readiness ramifications, and the American people, particularly Pennsylvanians, really deserve to know what they are, not just the list of the projects that are possible on the chopping block. And this administration has been very vocal about its frustration with Congress and its struggles to provide appropriate appropriations on time. And I think that, frankly, the criticism is very fair. But now that I'm also learning a little bit more about the referenced kind of department reprogramming, I think it's also fair to say that that burden is not just shared by the Congress, but also by the fact that we are reappropriating money, and that causes certainly uncertainty amongst the supply chain. I've heard from companies across Pennsylvania that they are struggling to hire, to train, and to retain staff, as well as to make capital investments. And so now I guess my questions to you are, did the department actually assess the impact on the defense supply chain, especially on small businesses, before deciding to move ahead with proposing these cuts and delays? And if not, why not? And if so, what were those assessments?
And you're referring to the
case and study of the 4 Pennsylvanian projects and what their impact would be, you know, on the supply chain if we were to pull back on those for small businesses and suppliers in my community particularly.
Right. I can't speak to the total assessment. I'll let David Norquist comment, but I believe the project that you're referring to on the propeller capacity is to be awarded in July, so that would not be one of the projects that would be.
Sir, it was provided to us as one of the possibilities.
Yeah.
Wait, so if I could clarify, what was provided to the Congress was a list of projects that had not been awarded since January of this year. And so that was the full vision of what's in the pipeline. What the Secretary has directed is to not affect any of those projects that were scheduled to be awarded before 1 October, 30 December. The reason for that is that in the budget there was a request for military construction funding in order to backfill those, so those projects would be. I know that the chairman has views on that, but I understand the department's intent was to make sure there wasn't an effect on the industrial base or on those facilities by ensuring that by the time you got to the next year when those projects were scheduled to be awarded, there would be additional MILCON to keep them going. But my understanding is the project you specifically mentioned would not be affected under either circumstance.
It just seems.
Thank you, but the gentlelady's time has expired.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't notice that. Sorry, sir.
You are up.
First, I want to thank you all for being here, and appreciate your leadership. Thanks for stepping forward and doing this. Our country needs people to step forward and lead. My first question revolves around readiness and modernization. 26 months ago when President Trump came in, our readiness levels were the worst seen since 1977. We had 58 combat brigades, in the Army, only 3 could deploy that were ready to fight tonight. Half the Navy aircraft couldn't fly. Air Force pilots are getting about half the flying time that they needed in training. I thought it was negligent for Congress to let us get to this spot. And we dug up modernization hole as well, with some of the oldest aircraft, ships, and tanks in the history of our country when you look at the average age. So since 2010 till 2 years ago, we cut the military budget 18%. And the last 2 years, we've added 60% of those cuts back in. General Dunford, Chairman, could you tell us what has been the impact of this increase on our readiness and modernization, and what happens if we don't sustain it? Thank you.
Sure. Congressman, I mean, it really is very simple. Number one, we're better able to meet the requirements that we have day to day. You know, I manage the force for the Secretary, make recommendations for him on employment of the force. And so if you think about the inventory of forces that are available for day-to-day operations, there are more forces available. Perhaps more importantly, we benchmark very carefully our ability to respond in the event deterrence fails in places like Korea or in Europe and so forth, and our ability to respond to a major contingency today is significantly greater than it was before. So there's a lot below that, right? I mean, Air Force fixing maintainers, numbers of airplanes that are available, modernization efforts that are ongoing and so forth. But at the end of the day, it's about the deliverable. It's about meeting today's requirements and then meeting our overall requirements to respond to a contingency if deterrence fails. And in both of those areas, the progress is measurable.
Mr. Shanahan, I want to ask you a question about the triad. As you know, there's proposals to take us to a dyad. How just important is it to maintain the triad that we've had for 60 years? What does it do to nuclear deterrence, to do away with our ICBMs? Thank you.
Yeah, I think, maybe 2 comments. If something's worked well for 70 years and the environment hasn't fundamentally changed, why would we change it? The obsolescence is a fundamental issue we have to address. But more importantly, I think it comes down to why would we unilaterally disarm when our competitors are arming themselves?
As part of that, could you tell us how important nuclear command and control and communications upgrades or modernization is also needed?
Yeah, well, the obsolescence of the triad, it's clear that we need to make those investments, and this was a little bit of the discussion we were having earlier around 5G. The nuclear command and control communication system is so fundamentally vital, and when we think about spoofing, or we think about systems being compromised, and as we invest in a new space architecture, new terrestrial architecture, we need to have total confidence in that the information that's being provided to our commanders and commanders-in-chief is completely trusted. And this is a new world in terms of cyber, so that's probably one of the most critical modernization programs that we have before the department.
I agree. Chairman, I got to follow up on a question on electronic warfare. We have 5 domains. We don't consider the electronic magnetic spectrum as a separate domain, though it is a physical domain. All of our radio messaging goes through that. Radar uses it. But our doctrine doesn't identify the electronic magnetic spectrum domain as that. And I think it should, but I'd be curious for your military professional opinion. Should we make the electronic magnetic spectrum a separate domain? Because we want to own it and prevent the enemy from using it.
Congressman, let me start by agreeing with you. We want to own it. And frankly, in the recommendation I made to the Secretary for this year's program recommendations, the electromagnetic spectrum was among the areas we highlighted. And as we do competitive area studies, that area comes back. There are a lot of critical functions inside of our warfighting capabilities that aren't in and of themselves domains. And so I right now am comfortable with the electromagnetic spectrum being something we look at through the lens of a function.
Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back, but I thank you for your testimony and your time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, General Mr. Nunquist, I want to thank you all for taking your time. It's been a long day for you already, and thank you for being here. I want to talk to you about a specific issue dealing with California. There's a contract has been awarded for a flight simulator for the 446th Airlift Wing of California's Air National Guard located at Naval Air Station Point Mugu. In November of last year, the installation had to be evacuated due to wildfires, and it so happened the 146th Airlift Wing also has been critical to combating the wildfires with its C-130J aircraft. Now, you had said earlier in your testimony that any contract that was going to be awarded after September 30th, 2019, the funding was going to be pooled. Which this specific simulator, the contract has been awarded, was going to be awarded after the date that you had mentioned. Any delay of the critical flight simulator programming for the 146th Airlift Wing would undermine readiness and impede training for pilots combating wildfire and conducting search and rescue. This is a big issue for being a Californian. I know it's a big issue for Congresswoman Julia Brownley, who it's this specifically in her district, and all members of Congress in California. Why would we cut funding for this critical flight simulator when it's so strategic to the training that these pilots need in order to support this critical mission here in California?
So the intention is not to cut funding for any of those projects. I think there's two things. First of all, just being in the pool doesn't mean that those projects are going to be selected. The Secretary hasn't made a decision yet on the use of 2808 or the authorities. The other is that we've requested money in order to ensure those projects continue. And so our hope would be that those fundings would be included in any enacted bill and allow us to ensure those essential projects go forward.
Secretary Shanahan, I'll say, notice in your written testimony, you wrote, "Our responsibility is to remain responsible stewards of your trust and the American taxpayers' hard-earned tax dollars. Congress has already funded these programs. Why would we fund them again, and how is that being responsible in watching the taxpayers' tax dollars?"
We're going to be responsible managing the taxpayers' money. Absolutely. I mean, that's my role, and you have my assurance that we're going to, in this department, take care of our people, maintain readiness, and modernize to fight future threats.
But would you say making them pay for the same thing twice is being responsible with the taxpayers' dollars? You wouldn't go and buy a vehicle and then have the car dealer take it away and say, you know what, I gave it to somebody else, you're going to have to pay for it again. Well, why would we do that to the American taxpayer?
Yeah. We haven't paid for it once yet. And this is the process that we're stepping through, and I think that was the place where we started this discussion. It's a complicated situation, and it's tied to a new budget. We're really buying time so we can backfill these projects.
All right. But if you're taking money away from a project that's already been funded, and then you're asking to fund that project again, it is being paid for twice. But I'm going to change topics here real quick. General, the Commandant of the Marine Corps, recently made a statement about deployments down to the border and having the, fund transfers under the President's emergency declaration, among other unexpected demands, have posed unacceptable risks to the Marine Corps' combat readiness and solvency. He said they haven't been able to fund other training that had been planned. Do you agree with his assessment that sending troops, Marines down to the border is hurting Marine Corps readiness?
Hey, Congressman, I would like to put that letter in full context. What the Commandant of the Marine Corps did, and I read the letter and spoke to him as well as the Secretary of the Navy about it. He listed a number of unanticipated bills that the Marine Corps was confronted with in this fiscal year, one of which was the southwest border. Those bills in the aggregate created difficulties for him in funding other priorities, and that really was what it was about. It wasn't a letter. This particular letter wasn't a letter about the southwest border and didn't single out the southwest border deployment as being the issue. It identified the southwest border as one of the unfunded, one of the unanticipated bills.
The gentleman's time has expired. Votes coming up. They're estimating sometime between now and the top of the hour. We will go until 10 minutes after the votes are called at the most, and then we'll be done. Mr. Desjardins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here today. Secretary Shanahan and Chairman Dunford, many of your predecessors have touted our nuclear enterprise as a, if not the top priority within the Department of Defense. Do you agree with this?
It's our singular most important mission.
I'm on record saying the same many times.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Chairman Dunford, do you also believe then it's important to advance our low-yield nuclear weapons system?
I do, Congressman, and I can explain that if you want me to explain the reason why.
Maybe just, yes, please.
Well, it'd probably be hard to do it
okay.
But I'd be happy to answer that question when the time, for the record or whatever, because I do feel like that low-yield option is critical for deterrence.
Okay. What does this budget do to accelerate U.S. development of hypersonic weapons?
Let me get you the number. We've accelerated the hypersonic testing and deployment several years with this budget. It's an extra $2.6 billion in this year's top line.
Okay. And do you think that it's on an appropriate and comfortable pace considering our adversaries' advancements?
Well, I'd like to be a bit further along, but this is a much faster pace than we've had in the last couple of years.
Okay. Chairman Dunford, many of the Department of Energy's nuclear weapons support facilities are over 40 years old and are in need of refurbishment. How important is a modern Department of Energy nuclear weapons development capability to your ability to provide a credible nuclear deterrence?
They're inextricably linked, Congressman.
Okay. Secretary Shanahan, what do you foresee the National Guard's role being in the Space Force?
That's a good one. Yeah, we've had a lot of debate, and General Lengyel has been at the center of that debate. There's some complexities about how those resources align and how their training and support is conducted today, but as they do in so many other elements of the total force, they'll play a critical role. The question today more is around how do we organize them than it is the importance of their role.
Okay. And I'm going to give 2 minutes back, Mr. Chairman. I yield back. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to be here today. Thank you also for your service, what you do for the men and women in uniform, as well as for the entire country. Thank you. As we discuss the $750 billion national defense budget, I speak for many of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle when I express my deep concern regarding the Department of Defense failure to proactively address PFAS contaminants on and around military establishments. I deeply appreciate Congressman Bergman bringing this up, and your comments that Acting Secretary Shanahan, that the EPA is working to address those standards. Meanwhile, you are merely working to eliminate use of PFAS, underscores that this response is wholly insufficient. I sincerely hope that the department hears the concerns of my colleagues and stops hiding behind bureaucratic and regulatory red tape to avoid helping communities clean up PFAS contaminants. To that end, Acting Secretary Shanahan, 2 weeks ago when you testified before SASC, Senator Heinrich asked if you read a New York Times article titled, "Pentagon Pushes for Weaker Standards on Chemicals Contaminating Drinking Water." Have you had the opportunity to read that article?
Yes, I have.
Thank you. Can you please speak on Senator Heinrich's second question as well? Is the article accurate, and is the Pentagon pushing the Trump administration to adopt weaker standards for groundwater pollution caused by PFAS and other chemicals?
The article is not accurate, and the Department of Defense is not asking for the standard to be lowered.
Thank you.
I hope that your actions will also reflect the importance of this issue.
Yep.
Thank you. I want to close by reiterating what Senator Heinrich said to you. I know there is a right way to do this. It is to follow the science. The right way to do this is not to set a standard that is based on trying to limit liability. I yield the remainder of my time.
Ms. Hill.
Acting Secretary Shanahan, the President's fiscal year 20 budget request has a $600 million decline in funding for the European Defense Initiative. Yet in your testimony today, you noted that Russia last year conducted its largest military exercise in almost 40 years and is escalating intimidation efforts. What's the rationale for reducing this funding when there's an increasingly hostile actor next door, and our own national defense strategy says that Russia is one of our two biggest concerns?
I'll ask the comptroller to walk you through the numbers, but fundamentally what it represents is that the standing up of the initiative, so think of it as either the setup costs or the non-recurring costs are complete, and now it's really about sustaining the level of effort and conducting more exercises and actually deploying more troops. David?
Correct. So the amount we're investing in presence and putting folks is up 170 million. The amount we're spending on training is up 300 million. What's down is the pre-positioning of equipment, because once the equipment's been moved into place, you don't need to keep paying for it. So while the cost is coming down, the actual level of activity is going up.
Thank you. So do we have, does this have anything to do with the fact that European countries are filling some of those gaps, or is this, do you have any sense that this will affect our position in any way?
Well, I think they're filling gaps, and they'll fill more gaps, particularly with the initiative to have more battalions, more battleships to be able to deploy more quickly, the 430s initiative. We also are conducting more exercises with NATO. So I think what you're saying is just more of the front end flow of money, especially from NATO, starting to get to the front line. This is, for NATO, what I think we'll see with their uptick in investment is more capability and capacity coming online. What you're seeing with the European Defense Initiative is the U.S. leading the integration and conducting higher level exercises.
Thank you. So can you give some specific examples of where NATO is filling those gaps or increasing?
I'll take that for the record, but I've seen some of those plans. I've seen some of the contributions that they're making to increase capability, as well as the exercises that we have organized so that we're conducting more sophisticated exercises like Trident Juncture. But let me take that for the record and provide you an update.
Do you have any concerns about the signals this might send to our allies and partners in Europe, considering the comments that are coming from this administration and our president, the ridicule for NATO, and the proposed cuts, that the signals that might send to Putin and to our partners and allies?
I've had, probably since I've been in this position, maybe 50 conversations with my counterparts in NATO, and it's really been the opposite. They're more engaged. They have a strong sense of leaning forward into these exercises, and I think they're more encouraged by our participation and presence in Europe today.
Oh, I had different conversations when I was in Europe for the Munich conference, and it seemed like the tone was a bit more insecure. But I'm curious why you feel like that's the case.
Well, and so I think about the defense ministers. I don't know who you were speaking with, but this was the defense ministers as we're doing the planning, and it wasn't just in terms of the NATO exercises there. This also had to do with our activity in Afghanistan, but in particular around NATO. And I think the best evidence of support was their unanimous support to our withdrawal from the INF. It was writ large in terms of supporting our position. But the side conversations to the person is, thank you for pushing us. We look forward to the exercises, because the exercises that we've been conducting have been very successful.
General Dunford, do you have any comments on this?
The only thing I would say, Congresswoman, is, other nations are contributing more, but no nation has increased its commitment to NATO more than the United States since 2015. So the European Defense Initiative, the addition of the Second Fleet down at Norfolk to ensure the transatlantic link, the increased intelligence people we provided to the Southern Hub and so forth. I would just tell you, my peers understand that the United States of America is still the most significant contributor to NATO and the most significant contributor to the deterrence in the defense that NATO provides.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman. Ms. Holland. Ms. Holland will be last.
Thank you.
Have votes.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here today. I appreciate your time immensely. I'd like to just sort of continue the comments of my esteemed colleague from New Mexico in a different way, I guess. I'll ask a few different questions, but it's concerning the contamination of military installations. The FY20 budget request contains $1.1 billion for environmental restoration, down from the FY19 enacted amount of $1.24 billion. In my district, the fuel spill on Kirtland Air Force Base, which resulted in 24 million gallons of jet fuel contaminating our ground soil and threatening Albuquerque's clean drinking water, has yet to be properly cleaned. At other bases in New Mexico and many other DoD installations throughout the country, dangerous levels of PFAS have been found in drinking water, and this contamination seeks to ruin people's lives. Given the scale of these and other environmental issues at DoD installations, please explain how the DoD's environmental restoration efforts will address public and environmental health and safety, and your rationale for the decreased budget request. And I'll add that you testified earlier about the money you essentially saved on not having to spend it on military personnel, which is, which everybody wants to, see go toward the wall. And I'm asking, why not spend money on cleaning up contamination that the military has caused?
So the number, let me make sure I have the right here, is for the environmental restoration, we have, I'm not able to follow that. So let me double check the environmental. My understanding was that the program is relatively flat, but I will double check. There's sometimes we get congressional ads that raise the 19 enacted. So even when we're the same number from year to year, you can see that trend. I think when it comes to the contamination concerns you raised about, we have three priorities. First is to protect, make sure people are drinking safe water. The second one is our responsibility to remediate those that are related to the defense establishment and our operations. And the third is to research alternatives. The Secretary talked about this in his comments, which is finding alternatives to be able to reduce our use of those contaminants, as well at the same time we're doing the cleanup.
And so you feel that by spending less money on environmental restoration, you can essentially achieve those ends?
I don't think we're looking to reduce our investment in this area.
Okay, thank you. Last, I'm going to switch gears over to transgender troops. Do you agree with me that the United States is stronger and safer when our military reflects our nation's diversity and upholds the constitutional belief that all people are created equal? General, Secretary?
Congresswoman, I couldn't agree more.
Okay.
I agree, yes.
Okay. Do you agree with me that the administration's current policy of obstructing transgender individuals' freedom to serve in the United States military essentially makes a mockery of this commitment?
Yeah.
Congresswoman, just to be clear, the current policy that's in place that was signed in 2017 allows transgenders to serve in the U.S. military.
So they can serve freely right now?
Today they can.
Okay, very good. And I've heard that, an argument is put forth that, spending is a concern, that that we don't want taxpayer money spent on gender dysphoria issues such as psychotherapy, prescriptions, surgeries, and so forth. And I just want you to know that we realize that that portion of the budget is minuscule in comparison to other things like, for example, erectile dysfunction, which took $84 million out of the DoD budget. So I just want you to know that I support wholeheartedly every single American who wants to serve in our military, that they have an opportunity to do so, and that with respect to budgets, knowing that it's a minuscule amount that is spent on transgender troops, I don't think that is anything that should dissuade them or us from their service. And I yield my time,
Thank
Chairman.
you. And if I could just follow up on that just briefly. It's a bit, the policy that was just announced by the administration through the DoD is a bit more complicated. The Secretary and I talked about this a little bit yesterday. And I don't think it is the correct policy. It is not a blanket ban on people who are transgender from serving in the military. It does, however, make it very difficult for people, depending on where they're at, in terms, are they in the service? Are they trying to join? Have they had transition surgery? All of those things have really, really complicated the ability of transgender people to serve in the military. And I also feel that the policy, as announced, does not accurately reflect the medical facts. But we will be dealing with that later, and I understand you have struggled to try and get the right policy there. But it is considerably more complicated than even I thought at first glance. But I don't think right now the policy meets the standards that Ms. Holland was hoping to have in terms of allowing diverse people to serve, assuming that they're qualified, assuming that they can meet the qualifications for whatever job it is they're supposed to do in the military. Mr. Thornberry, do you have anything quickly?
I do, Mr. Chairman. In the presence of the Secretary and Chairman and the Comptroller, I just want to note that while we've been meeting today, Andy Marshall has passed away. He ran the Office of Net Assessment from the Nixon administration to the Obama administration. I can think of fewer people who have had a bigger impact on focusing our defense efforts, our national security, in the right direction than Mr. Marshall. And we talk about a lot of stuff today, but I think as General Dunford started out, it's about people. Some of them are not even in uniform, but it is a remarkable life. He has been before our committee, I don't know how many times over the years. So I wanted to note that passing, but also to honor his memory because he made such a difference.
And I think that is a very appropriate note to end on. We are adjourned. I thank you, gentlemen.